welcome to the Professional Media Presence podcast series. In this episode, Giovanni Sabelli Fioretti from Peripezie Urbane and Bellamed, a dancer and choreographer, are speaking about the art industry through the lens of intersectionality.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Professional Media Presence podcast. I am Giovanni and I'm here with
Bellamed.
During the last activities in the Professional Media Presence project, we had the chance to invite Niv to our workshop week in Venice. Niv is a dancer, trainer, choreographer based in Germany, and we invited him to talk and to have a panel with our artists about intersectionality, a very interesting and actual topic also in the arts, in the art world. Niv, can you just introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hi, Giovanni. Thanks for having me. Also, thanks for inviting me to the PMP project.
You're welcome.
It was a pleasure to work together. So, hello, my name is Niv. I'm a dance artist, a dancer, performer, also a choreographer, and working in different positions of assistance, rehearsal, direction in the contemporary dance and the theater field in Germany. Besides that, as Giovanni mentioned, I teach professionals in companies, in workshops, and have by now quite a practice in education work, creating awareness to dancers' rights, topics of dancers' rights within the German scene through workshops, through panel discussions, and the attempt to create interactive choreographic panel discussions that allow dancers to express opinions and deliberate on topics in alternative ways with each other, through their body as well as through their verbal processing.
Coming to the topic of today's episode, intersectionality. How would you define intersectionality, and can you tell us something about how you came aware of the importance of this topic of intersectionality, intersectional practices in the art world?
Sure. Intersectionality, first of all, is a concept that comes from law. To tie it back to why we are talking about intersectionality is an important lens that got introduced to me through a colleague, Whitney Cover. She's been working as an educator in the field of dance for years. She has a master's in dance education from Harvard, and we've been collaborating in the past few years. And she brought about the topic of intersectionality to our work in 2020, alongside the work of Black Lives Matter and the events around George Floyd and the numerous names that joined that name, unfortunately. Intersectionality is a lens that we invite into our panel discussions in order to create an inclusive environment and a safe space. And our particular panel in PMP was called The Artist, Intersectionality and Social Media, sort of garnering the connection between, or talking about the connection between how an artist presents themselves online through the lens of their identity, both professional and personal identity. And to your question as to what intersectionality is, I will say I am not an expert. However, I can speak a bit to the history of it. Intersectionality, as I said before, is a term from the field of law that has been coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a professor at Columbia Law School in the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies. Kimberly basically needed to find a perspective through which law or verdicts could be decided that based on the individual in front of her, the individual person, and all the different identity traits that define them. So, for example, if there was a trial and a black man, was put up to trial, the verdict could be different if the person will be a black woman, because different forces of society work on a black man or a black woman. Perhaps a black man would be oppressed by racism, systemic racism based on the skin of his color, and maybe a woman would be oppressed by the skin of her color, as well as the fact that she's a woman and has certain constructs and expectations from societies. Her identity might bring a different challenge for her to lead her to do different things. So the concept of intersectionality is basically based on the idea of each identity trait can be defined as a road or as a lane. So gender would be one, and ethnicity, language, level of education, religion, age, and it is found out that sometimes these traits intersect. So discrimination could happen in a few of these lanes at the same time, and in that intersection, a person can be found and be disadvantaged by more than one identity trait. So this is a lens that for me, when I use it in a panel or when I offer it in a panel, it's to remind us that each person has their own baggage, their own story, and they're operating under different forces when they come to speak from different perspectives and experiences. So I, as a man, would say one thing, and I would always try to invite other people who don't agree with me because they have different stories, because maybe they are women, maybe they're more queer than me, if there is a more and less, and maybe they have a disability. They see things from a perspective that should be invited into the space in that very moment.
It's like to say that these kind of traits that you mentioned before, they don't generate like a sum, let's say, so gender plus race plus able, equal, such and such, but they just mix together and they create something totally different.
Exactly.
So that a black man is not black plus man and a black woman is not black plus woman, but the discrimination tensions act in different ways.
Exactly.
How do you think is intersectionality relevant for the art world, or also based on your experience as a dancer? I mean, you work in a very specific niche of the art world, which is dance performance, but of course intersectionality can be seen as a force or a concept that work in all possible artistic fields. Do you think it is relevant in our societies for an artist to be aware of intersectionality, or let's say so, of the different lines of tensions in their identity, or not, and sufficiently represented or not, in your experience?
So this is a very good question. I think there's a few lines of answering. I will first start with something that I actually noticed in the panel that we had in Venice. I come from, as mentioned before, from the field of performance art, the field of dance. And within the panel, we had one question in which we asked the participants to express how political their art is, how political they want their art to be. And we saw quite an interesting spread that most of the performing artists were on the side that my art should be very political and my identity should be represented in my art. And on the other end of the spectrum, people that were more from visual media or game design, arts that were more static in time or less live arts, felt like their art should not be representing their identity and not their political views. That was quite a core discussion. And as a person who works in the field of performing arts, I noticed that many times the themes are humanity and politics, and I can speak from that lens. Many times in the performing art fields, we use topics that do with identity, because I assume when we work with expression, when we work with our body, with our voice, with behavior, very soon we fall into what is a social construct, what is a social pedestrian movement, what is a common thought that we all have, and how can we get inspired by it, rather than if we are having a representation of nature that is incarnated in a vase or in something that is not necessarily human shaped. In my opinion, for fields especially that use the human experience as material, it's very important to enrich the discourse with intersectional concepts, because very often in popular media it seems so that only a part of population is represented, if that makes sense. We have been seeing a progress in the last couple of years, and it became also a bit trendy to show other ethnicities, other colors, other abilities. In my opinion, it is important to have that lens and to have this skill set of how to communicate within a space that is diversified and that contains different abilities. Many times the reason we do not mention certain people is because we are not aware that perhaps there is a neurodivergent person in the space. We do not know how to encounter a person like this simply because we have not been exposed so far. So in that sense, the education that this exists and how can we create art that speaks to people of different needs, as well as how do we communicate with people of different needs, I think is very important. Also, a lot of the art field is ruled, at least where I come from, is ruled by where does the funding go? Where do residencies go? Who do we give a slice of the cake to be granted space and means and resources to create art? And in that sense, this, at least in Germany, seems like it's more and more diversified. So to be able to have the terminology of what is needed in terms of what are the different categories, that sounds very bureaucratic what I'm saying, but how can we make sure different people with different identity traits get this exposure? I find this very important, especially because the people who consume or experience the art that we create get to see a perspective that perhaps a person without disability or a person without a queer history would not have seen.
While you were speaking, another question bubbled into my mind. What is, in your opinion and in your experience, the connection between intersectionality and power dynamics? I mean, speaking of the art world, we are artists that produce, or let's say, work for an audience, or for audience in the sense of performing arts, but also audience for visual artists and so forth and so on. There was also a question during the panel about that. As you mentioned, we should be aware of funders, but also within our own sector, there are power dynamics that often have something to do with intersectionality, or with a lack of intersectional representation of different identities. I'm thinking of the dance sector specifically. Dance is usually, in the Western cultures, temporary cultures, connected with a certain, can I say, feminization? Is that a word?
Do you mean that the dance field is mainly populated by women?
Yeah,
by female presenting?
Exactly. This kind of common opinion. At the same time, the top level of management in the dance sector are mainly, I'm not generalizing because it's in the statistics, mainly men, if not white men.
It's interesting on that. I just had access to a list of the ballet directors in Germany. Cool. And I had particularly inquired, what is the percentage? I have to admit the percentages was more pleasing than I thought it would be. I don't know exact numbers, but it was around 36%, 40% women run, maybe between 30 and 40, which is more than I expected. But definitely it is a trend that most, also the bigger names within the world of dance at least, are white men, and as far as I know, also heterosexual.
And this is also a matter of intersectionality, I guess.
It's definitely a topic that intersectionality would love to discuss if it were a person. So we were talking about power structures, and this is a topic that indeed actually interested me a lot in the last couple of years in the educational field. So again, it's not very scientific, but from my little experience, power is incarnated in our art forms a lot. So if we talk about dance again, ballet has been the main stream where dance would be funded as well as presented to the world in the last centuries. Ballet itself is a classistic art form. It came from the courts of the king. It shows the poor people how aristocrats should behave, and then today it became this maybe more statement of how much did you train and how good and how high can your performance be. But it also it's not devoid of colonized narratives, because it also, as the place who has the biggest share of the cake, many people from colonized countries will try to aspire to become ballet dancers, which is a culture foreign to their own, which means that they cancel their way of dancing in order to connect to that. So it is not devoid of class and colonization and aristocracy. And if that would be the main tone of the dance field, then already inherently there's something non-intersectional, something that prioritizes a certain identity. I know of efforts, for example, I have a friend from Jamaica that their whole plan in his company is to find a third balance of more indigenous local dances, of ballet and of modern techniques, in order to sort of right the wrongs of history, if that makes sense. And that is a very good example how a bon ton mainstream of an art field can dictate and make the art field more or less accessible. And that also, referring to the gender situation, the gender question, it's also a question of accessibility. I am very privileged that I managed to fund my way through dance school. Of course, it has to do with my identity traits, that I was born to a not so poor family, not so rich, but not so poor. that I was able to support myself and to get education to support myself through the education. And perhaps the reason, I don't know the reason, but perhaps some of these positions are not accessible to people who come from a different background, as well as positions of power. So the glass ceiling is also available in the art field, I believe. A certain behavior might be expected that some people just did not grow up with, or a certain financial background might be an advantage. And if you're a man and maybe you don't have to breastfeed for after your child is born, then perhaps you have more time to acquire the abilities to become the ballet director. I just worked with a choreographer who exactly is struggling with this right now. She was creating with a 6 months old in her hands, and she braved through it, and it's amazing. She was exhausted. So yeah, accessibility, and this is why I think the discussion about intersectionality is important, so we can find how we can change the system to grant opportunities to people that the system have ignored for a while. Because maybe the system is created to cater to people who have access already, because it perpetuates itself. And if we can reimagine the system to allow other identity in, then perhaps we'll create a more diversified system and more diversified artistic output.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think also one major question about that is also how we can envisage new time, a new working time that take care also of different identities. Also, for instance, we work in a pretty much male forged time structure, so we have to go towards a goal, so it's very linear. While I read a report about a project by a female artist, female dance artist, that she was researching how the 28-day time of the menstrual cycle is affecting the different qualities of working, and how this can be important is also imagining other, also for instance funding schemes that are not, okay, there's a deadline, you have to come up with behind the deadline, otherwise you are fucked up, And I think it's kind of an interesting topic for the future. Coming to the digital part of our podcast episode, this is also one main topic of the whole project, professional media presence. How do you see identities or the concept of identities and different identities represented in social media? Is there intersectional questions?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. In general, also the starting point of our panel discussion in the week in Venice was also to cater to social media and how do we present. So first of all, in my opinion, the way I view it and the way we devise the panel, social media is a place where we curate our identity. So we show the world how do we want to be perceived, because we decide which post, which story, which tweet, which job line we write on LinkedIn. All this at least has the possibility to be pretty much thought out before it's put out there, in comparison to if I just meet a person down the street and it's all live and I need to decide on the spot. So this is also what we wanted to do. This was a part of our goals within the panel, was to, first of all, allow the participants a space to sort of reflect on their own identity first, to see what is important for me to say, or with my art, what is important for me to say as a person, what is important for me not to say in my art or as a person, what is important for me in my job, which were all different layers. It's not to assume that my personality or my personal life is my professional life, and that my professional life is my artistic life, that my art is art is personal. So already that is an intersectional understanding of self, personal, professional, artistic. And we were trying to create a space for the participant to think, what is important for me to present online? How do I curate myself? What part of my identity do I want to put forward, and what part of my identity I do not want to put forward? So in that sense, social media, as mentioned before, is a place to show to show things, and our presence is very much curated. In that sense, we also had a very interesting discussion on social media, especially Instagram, as a marketing tool. So do I want a virtue signal? So to show I am a person of that ethnicity and of that gender and of that belief, this could make you buy my art more or not. So in the end, it's also important to acknowledge that Instagram is working in a highly capitalistic framework of marketing. So if we want to use that as a marketing tool, or if we want to use that without that aspect, which we cannot decide what the algorithm does with us, but we can decide how we at least feed the algorithm. So in my opinion, social media is a place that has shown exposed diversity and exposed different traits of identity more so than before, because people have the freedom to show things. That comes with the sting, with the danger that people will become virtue signaling, to show something that maybe they don't really believe in, just in order to get more likes, views, monies, shares, opportunities. So it's a double-edged sword.
So there can be the tendency to use this intersectional discourse to sell yourself, to sell your image and your work.
Exactly. It could be the notion of it can be exploited, and what we were trying to cultivate is a way for the participants to, first of all, have a map of themselves if they want to, and then to at least bring consciousness to how they engage in their art first, and then in their online presence secondly. We also had a very interesting situation within the panel that I found very interesting. There was a moment that we asked the participants whether they view their art as political, or they view or if it's important for their art to be political. And we had, again, very clear, there was a spectrum of people, but from both ends of the spectrum we collected some answers and what people thought. And some people were saying that it's very important for them, for their art to represent, that it is representing problems perhaps of climate, of identity, of marginalized people, of poverty, because they want to voices that other people don't have. They want to use their position, which was a quite respectable and admirable position to have. And then from a person who was of different abilities, she is a person with the Down syndrome. She mentioned that for her, she wants her art to be as professional as possible. She doesn't want to represent anyone. She wants to be in the mainstream art because she sees no difference between herself and others. And one can say from the outside, this is extremely political, but for her, in that particular moment, she strives to be as good as she can and to be not acknowledged because of her disability, but to be acknowledged in spite of her disability or of different ability. Maybe disability is not the right word here. That was an interesting moment of how do different identities interact within this space, diverse space.
Thank you, Niv. We gave lots of input, I guess, about this topic. Thanks a lot for being here with us, for joining the workshop week and now this podcast. And let's meet again in the future.
Yeah, Giovanni, thank you so much for inviting me to take part and develop this panel together and this week together. It was a pleasure also to see how different artists of different fields engage with this topic and with the creative process altogether. So that was very enriching. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Bye.
Thank you for listening. The Professional Media Presence project is co-funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. Make sure to follow the updates on our social media, Instagram and Facebook, and visit our website pmpproject.eu. Stay tuned for more episodes.